Video games are now the most profitable form of media on the planet, and the industry is growing and evolving every day. Back before games were mainstream, developers and video game companies didn't put too much effort into the marketing of things. They would sometimes throw together a goofy-looking commercial that didn't really advertise anything about the game itself.
Something's gone wrong in the happy-go-lucky world of Nintendo.
Most of the time, deciding on a new video game was completely based on its box art. Nowadays, there are too many games out there for people to blindly invest their hard-earned money into. So developers learned that if they want people to buy their games, they need to make sure that they can't walk 10 feet without seeing an advertisement begging you to play. Sonic the Hedgehog McDonald's toys, Nintendo-themed cereal boxes, No More Heroes toilet paper, and Angry Birds bra. Needless to say, developers are reaching their target audiences. However, it is possible for a video game to be a little too advertised. Sometimes games are exhibited to have impossible standards. They are shown to make you believe that they might change your life, alter your outlook on the world, or save your marriage, but sadly, this is mostly a trick used to get you to pay them money and ghost you. This sounds more personal than I intended it. All I'm trying to say is that if a build-up to a game makes you believe that it's larger than life, it's most likely not the case. Enter Cyberpunk 2077. The game was first announced all the way back in 2012, and as time passed, people have gotten more and more excited for the game's release. As I am sure most of you are aware, Cyberpunk has been delayed countless times since its first initial announcement, making fans more and more anxious to finally get their hands on this game. Skipping all of the many years of extreme hype for the game, it has finally arrived on December 10th, 2020. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the game has sold incredibly well all over the world. But what players didn't expect is how vastly different the game was than they imagined. Now, before I dive too deep into my personal thoughts on the game, there are a few things I think I should make pretty transparent. I was not as immensely excited for the game as most people. In fact, I only really showed interest in the game a few days before the release. That being said, my expectations weren't exceedingly high for the game, even though the marketing of the game made it seem like it was going to cure any underlying diseases. I went into this game as I would any other game, being hopeful yet open-minded. The next important thing to note is that I got my copy of the game on Sony's PS4, so I can't speak for any experience on the next-gen consoles and PC. And finally, I want you to know that I am fully aware that this is completely my opinion, and you're welcome to have your own as well. However, I think it's important to hear other people's perspective on a game, no matter how much you disagree, to consider different possibilities in your judgment. I would also love to hear what you guys think of the game in the comments below. So here's how I'm going to structure this already over the place video. First, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the game, then I want to talk about the online reaction to the game so far. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about my experience with the game so far. So in the opening hour of the game, you start by creating your character and begin to get introduced to the world. I chose the street kid life path, but I was fairly disappointed with the amount of customization options in the character creator. Although it was pretty limited on options, I was still willing to give it a pass because the majority of the game is seen through a first-person perspective. But as my character finally entered the world, I had pretty mixed feelings. First of all, the world of Night City looks great, regardless of being on last-gen console. For the aesthetic of the city alone, I regret not being able to experience this on a next-gen, but it was still really cool to look at nonetheless. Every single nook and cranny of the city is brimming with life, with possibly the most unique-looking NPCs that I've ever seen in a game. Another cool feature I noticed is that NPCs have different animations to look more natural and fit in the world. Sometimes you will come across NPCs having a conversation, and it's pretty tempting not to stop what you're doing and eavesdrop on them. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the driving, because I think it's a lot of fun. Most of the time while playing the game, I would just drive around the city at night to take in the views. It's no GTA 5 driving, but there's a different level of fluidness to getting behind the wheel in this game. Now, to quickly sum up my thoughts on the story without spoiling anything, I like it. It is a bit convoluted and confusing at times, even making a Yakuza game a bit jealous, but it was still thrilling nonetheless. Characters were interesting enough, I never felt an emotional connection to many of them, which I will get into later, but they're still mostly likable and stayed true to the tone of the game. So I think it's about time I rip off the band-aid and talk about what everyone's raving about online. Now I'm gonna go out and say it. The bugs in this game are a really big problem. Before you start attacking me in the comments about this, let me explain what I mean. Within the first hour of the game, I experienced so many bugs it was almost impossible to ignore. Within the first scene, I already had so many glitches to take me out of the experience. There was an inventory pop-up that wouldn't go away no matter what I did. There were people talking over each other's lines, some NPCs were straight up floating in place, Obviously these aren't game breaking, but they definitely made me feel a lot invested in what was happening. I was starting to get very skeptical, as this is the first experience players will have in the world. You would think that they would put some extra care in the very first few minutes of gameplay. How is the rest of the game going to function from this point on? Well, luckily it seems like all the bugs flung on me prematurely, because this was probably the most severe example of bugs I experienced in Cyberpunk. They were definitely still there, but a lot less common. Not that that's really something to brag about. About an hour later into the game, I experienced something that I hate to admit I was going to need to get used to. The game completely crashed and froze my PS4, forcing me to restart my console altogether. Since the day of release to the point of me writing the script about a week later, this has happened at least 5 times. Now, it's hard for me to define what a game-breaking bug actually consists of, but it definitely limited the amount of enjoyment I was able to have. While playing the game, it was hard for me to go more than 5 minutes without finding a new bug in the game, which truly was detrimental to being immersed in the world. I found myself constantly being taken out of the story, just praying my game won't break again. This is hands down the most bugs and glitches that I've ever experienced in the release of a game, which sadly drowned out all the good parts, which I would have loved to experience. Now, here's what I really wanted to talk about. And it's the whole reason why I'm making this video in the first place. I haven't seen this many people's opinions online divided like this since the last few Star Wars movies. Some people are calling the game a perfect piece of art, saying there are 0 flaws and that people who are having experience different than them are either exaggerating or straight up lying. On the other end, there are people saying that the game is so completely broken that it ruined their lives and they're crying themselves to sleep over it. Look, people are able to enjoy or dislike a game as much as they want, and with freedom of speech, you should be able to say whatever the hell you want. One of the biggest arguments on the side of people who obsess over this game I've seen has been, well, yeah, you shouldn't have gotten the game on last gen in the first place. While we were all aware the game was going to look better on the next gen consoles, this is definitely no excuse for the sheer amount of bugs in the game. They still sold us the game at full price on a console that it was originally intended for, so it is reasonable to have some complaints. The platform for which you play also has little to do with the argument, because bugs are bugs regardless of what graphics card you are using. At the same time, this game isn't the total waste of time and money that people are calling it. There are bugs in the game that, yes, are game breaking, but the majority of bugs are similar to the ones that you'll see in any other game. An NPC floating on an invisible chair isn't going to make me throw away my PS4, so the outright hatred towards this game that clearly had many years of work put into it is a bit unfair. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, it is important to note that CD Projekt Red is planning to roll out constant performance patches over the next year, hopefully fixing most of the issues the game is suffering from at this point in time. Also, they announced that they're offering full refunds to the game, which I think is a huge step to take for the redemption arc. Hopefully in the next few months, the game will be drastically different from its current state, and we all get to experience what they wanted us to experience from the start. Maybe I'll touch back on this subject in a couple months, but for now, I hope you are all able to find enjoyment in this game regardless. For now, I'm going to give Cyberpunk a 6 out of 10, but that rating will probably change when I take a deeper, less rushed dive into the game next year. Thanks for hearing me out, guys. I know this is kind of a controversial one, but I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. What I'm curious to know is how different the game is on next gen and PC. Let me know your experience down in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys next week.